Hello, I'm Lizelle Sambry and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And today we are doing my 2023 wrap up and reflection. I'm going to talk about my highs and lows for the year, some of the things I learned, some of the things I had to relearn, discuss a little bit about my reading stats and have a little bit of a reflection there, and then just kind of a final reflection to wrap everything up. So I will have timestamps linked down below, so if you want to jump around to different sections, you are welcome to do that. And then I also want to say that this is really more general. Like if you want to know updates about kind of my specific projects and how those have gone, I am going to have a video come out in the new year where I'm going to talk about everything I did project-wise from the middle of 2023 to the end, and then also kind of what my plans are for my writing projects going forward into 2024. So that video is going to come out in January, and this is really kind of like a general reflection sort of video. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with the highs because why not? Why not start out on a positive note? So some of the really wonderful things that happened this year, writing / publishing wise. This isn't an exhaustive list. I do actually for myself keep track of all of the like happy things that happened throughout the year. I keep a running list for the whole month so I can always look back and reflect and like, you know, take in the bigger picture of all the things I'm really excited about and that I'm happy to have accomplished throughout the year. But this is really just like a very quick sort of highlight reel. So to start, my third book, Delicious Monsters, came out and I got to go on my first ever book tour, which was really exciting. I went to Atlanta and LA, and then I also went to Portland and just kind of like did events with other authors, with indie bookstores. I'm so grateful to the authors that came out and did those events with me, Aiden and Terry and Ryan Douglas, like Terry J. Benton Walker, Aiden Thomas, Ryan Douglas. There we go. I was like, I didn't say everybody's last names. Very, very thankful to them for doing those events for me. So that was amazing getting to go on my first book tour. I felt very like, you know, it feels very like wine and dine and like celebrity author stuff. Which I know it's not just, you know, those aren't the only people that get to do tours, but it felt very much that way for me. And so that was really exciting. It was also really wonderful just to hear from readers how much they had been enjoying Delicious Monsters. That was a really big deal to me, and I also really appreciated that. I still appreciate that. I always appreciate that from readers, but I really appreciated that a lot. And then I also got to go to Y'all West as a author guest for the first time. So that was in California as well. That was in Santa Monica. So that was my first time getting to go to Y'all West, which was really cool. That had been one of my like dream events to be invited to as an author. And that was really cool too, because I got to hang out with Becca C. Smith and Cache Warren. That was really cool to also get to like meet up with them there and just like have a great time. That was really wonderful. I also got a grant from the Canada Arts Council to work on the Couples Retreat, which is the adult thriller that I was working on all year. That was really great and exciting because I feel like every time I apply for a grant in the beginning of the year, it's like stress time to be like, am I going to get it or not? So that was really exciting to have been able to get that grant, which allowed me to then go to Niagara-on-the-Lake and do some research as well, which was great because whenever I set things in real places, I always love being able to go and actually do research on the ground. So that was really fantastic. Also Blood Like Fate, which is my second book, the second book in the Blood Like duology, earned out, which was also really exciting. If you aren't sure what earning out is, in traditional publishing, often you get an advance, and your advance is kind of an advance against royalties, and so you have to sell enough books to earn back that advance or earn out the advance, and then you can start earning royalties on the book. So that happened for Blood Like Fate this year, which was really exciting. So my entire first series, Blood Like Magic and Blood Like Fate, has earned out, which is really exciting, and for me a really great accomplishment because a lot of books never earn out, and so that's a big deal to me, and I'm really excited about having been able to do that. Like, it does mean quite a bit to me. And I was able to sell sell another set of books. So I sold a Mastery of Monsters and a sequel, once again to Simon & Schuster, to Margaret K. McElderry, to my same editor that I've been working with this whole time on my full-length original IP. So that was really, really exciting. It was a bit of a saga because that wasn't what I went on submission with. If you want to hear the whole story, I will link down below my video about how I got my book deal, which discusses kind of like the up and down sort of thing of coming to finally selling a Mastery of Monsters, which I'm really excited about because, you know, as I said in that video, that was really what I had wanted to work on next, and I just kind of didn't feel like it could happen, and that I wasn't kind of prepped for it, or it wouldn't work out. And so it's actually really exciting to me that in this like very kind of roundabout way, I ended up getting to work on the book series that I wanted to work on next and wanted to work on the most. So I'm really excited about that. And then I was also really fortunate to have Delicious Monsters be a Barnes & Noble Book of the Month pick. That was really, really exciting. It was so cool to like see all of the Barnes & Noble displays with like the big little picture of like Delicious Monsters and the blurb from Ryan Douglas on it, and like the display of all of the books. Like that was really, really exciting, and that's like a huge amount of visibility for my book, which really, really does make a difference. And it was just really great to be able to have that push in that way. That also meant that like my book appeared in the top 10 of the Barnes & Noble 100 top best-selling YA and teen books for a day there. But it stayed in the 100 for a very long time, and it was really exciting to have gotten in the top 10 at all. That was, once in a moment of weakness, I decided to look at my Barnes & Noble ranking for I think I looked for Blood Like Magic, and I was like, wow, that was terrible for my self-esteem. I shall not be doing that again. So those rankings are really something I hadn't looked at, just because my book had never come close in any amount to kind of show up on that website in that way. And so it was really wild to see it in the top 10 of YA. That was like very like wow. So that was also really, really wonderful to see, and really exciting. And thank you so much to everyone who like went to Barnes & Noble and like took a picture and sent it to me on Instagram so that I could see it and share it. And then I was really lucky when I was in Chicago, I got to do a meet and greet event, and then I got to go and like actually see the display in person, which was really cool and just very exciting. And then finally, just sneaking in there around the end of the year, Delicious Monsters was nominated in the Goodreads Choice Award for YA Fantasy and Sci-Fi, which was very, very exciting. That was something I had absolutely no expectation of ever accomplishing or achieving, or seeing my book show up. I think just because I'm so used to seeing a lot of really, really, really popular books show up there, and I think, I don't know, just because it's my book and I'm the author of it, I was like, oh, it's probably not ever going to be that popular. So it was really exciting to get to see it show up on there in that first round of the top 20. That was really exciting. And again, all about visibility, like so many things that like just put the book out to more people and show the book to more people are always really exciting for me. And now on to the lows. And so the biggest one of the year for me, which I think if you've been following my channel in any way, you probably know, is the commercial success of Delicious Monsters, which I feel like I've had such a journey with this throughout the year, but I'm gonna take you through the whole thing. So way back when, all the way back at the end of February, when Delicious Monsters first came out, the week after that was when I was going to have access to my first week's sales. So because I'm a Simon & Schuster author, they have a portal which I have access to that I can check and see what my sales are looking like in terms of consumer sales. So I went into that on the day that you can check to basically see how I had done. I'm just like this person. Some people don't check and they live their lives free, but I'm not that sort of person. I had to check, I had to see how it was doing and like feel some sort of sense of how everything was going. So I went in and I checked, and the number was significantly lower than I had been expecting for first week sales for a book that had had that much support from my publisher. So essentially at that point I was like, oh, and so I essentially emailed my agent to just kind of get a gauge on what the publisher thought about those numbers, because I wanted to know where we all stood. I wanted to have an idea of how everything was. And the ultimate consensus was that for them also, those were much lower than they expected for that first week. And kind of, it was just, that was kind of the sticking point of it. All of this was lower than we expected. And that was kind of it. But for me, I knew that meant I hadn't done the thing. I hadn't done the thing. Whatever expectation there was for this book, which it felt like there was quite a bit because a lot had been invested into the marketing and the pushing of this book. There were things that I had never gotten to do as an author, or had never had happen for my books that now happened because it was a bigger title. They paid me significantly more money for it. And so to me, I tried not to create expectations for myself, but I clearly did. And so it was kind of it was a big womp 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 all around. And that was really difficult. It was really difficult because I felt very strongly that the success of a book could be swayed significantly by publisher effort. And it was really hard for me to see that my publisher did put in a lot of effort and it didn't work. And that this book that I continue to think is my best work in terms of writing just didn't do what it was meant to do. And it was really difficult on kind of several fronts. For one, the book had really pulled in a lot of great accolades by that point. And so it felt to me that it looked externally like it was performing very well. And so but then that wasn't showing up in the numbers. And so that was very confusing for me. It was also very confusing again, like I said, because all of that publisher effort had been put into it. And it kind of felt like this huge disconnect. And then later on, seeing more numbers and things like that, it had gotten a lot of buy-in from booksellers and bookstores, and really the kind of sticking point was just the consumer end of that, like people actually going in and picking up the book and buying it. And that was really rough because it was just kind of something I couldn't change, but it's also something that immediately had very real career consequences for me. For one, I found that I pretty much immediately, in terms of kind of the US things, didn't really get invited to do anything else in terms of event wise, whereas it felt like in the lead up to Delicious Monsters I suddenly was like being invited to a bunch of things, and then that kind of swiftly sort of stopped. I did still get invited to Canadian events, which was wonderful, and I really appreciate every event that I was invited to, I really do, but it felt so stark. And then also there was the whole thing of it kind of just felt like it's that thing also generally when you put out your book, there's a lot of lead up to the book coming out, and suddenly there's like kind of a swift fall off. But it was that sort of thing where I knew if it had performed highly, like if it had been on a bestsellers list or something like that, then things would have picked up, but it didn't do any of those things. So then it was like, okay, now we have a swift stop. And then kind of, to me, monetarily for my life, most importantly, it affected how we went into negotiations for my next book deal. Because the book had not performed in a way expected, it could not then justify paying the same amount or more for another book deal. And so it was rough for me to feel like I was having all these very swift consequences for something that I ultimately cannot control. And it was a little bit hard too to see like that effort had really been put in and it kind of didn't really pan out in that specific way. It started to make me really feel kind of like I did have some times where I felt very like, what is the point? It was really hard for me because again, this is the best book I've written and it couldn't become a commercial success. And it made me kind of feel like, is it like, what is the point of writing something really good if like you write your best thing and it's still not enough? And that was really rough for me because it kind of felt like, how am I going forward? Like, how am I going forward with like trying and that sort of thing, which I know in the grand scheme of things, very silly because every author tries with their books. Every author tries so hard with their books. They're writing the best book possible. They put them out, and very, very frequently those books never become commercial successes. And I think that's where I had to really shift my perspective and kind of separate from the commercial success of my book and the literary creation of my book because they are two very separate things. Commercial success is largely on, you know, marketing and publicity, but also kind of like word of mouth and pickup and like being in the right place at the right time and like having the right buzzwords and like all of these different things coming together in combination. And yes, the quality of the work does play into that, but it plays into it almost after the fact, because it's so important for that commercial bit just to get people to pick up the book. And getting people to pick up a book and getting people to like a book are two very different tasks. And if people read the book early and they really like it, that can be helpful. But I think just like for the mass amount of people, you really just want to get them in there and pick up the book, and that's how you achieve commercial success. And the quality of the book almost becomes kind of secondary. And I feel like the realization of that in my own experience kind of like, I don't want to say made me like jaded, but it did make me feel like a little bit crappy. And it was rough. So that was just like that was just my hardest part of the year, was just kind of right from the beginning there. I was like, oh, I guess I didn't do what I was supposed to do. And that kind of felt like it set the theme for the year. And I spent most of the year trying to claw my way back from that, really trying to embrace all the positive things that had happened for the book, all of the amazing readers that like told me how much they enjoyed the book. Every time someone said, I saw it here, I saw it there, and I picked up a copy, and like all of the different, you know, later amazing things that happened for the book, and really focusing on that. But it was really hard for me, and I don't even think I've fully done it, to shake off just the kind of film of what had happened in the beginning of the year, and that sort of like weight of being like, I guess this is like, I'm not a commercial success, which is so funny because in my first series, it was a little bit different. It was like there were very low expectations. And so when it achieved beyond those, it was really great. And so it was like, yay. And then when I started with higher expectations, it kind of felt like there's nowhere else to go but down. And I feel like that's what I experienced, but I feel like and I'll talk about this a little bit more in the what I learned section, but I feel like I have come through that much better by now. But yeah, that was the biggest low of the year for me, and specifically too because it was so pervasive, like carried through to the entire year, which is so funny for me to think about too, because so many amazing things continued to happen for the book and it continued to be visible. And it was like every time something good happened, it was this like battle in my mind, because I was like, oh, that's amazing and I'm really excited about that. And then I'd be like, but didn't I do bad? Like, and it was hard to reconcile that. And I think the thing to encapsulate is I never did bad. I never did bad. The book never performed poorly. It's just there was some expectation that between neither me nor my publisher was ever really expressed or quantified or decided upon. And then this feeling that I had not reached it. And that kind of pushing forward. But the book still did well. This is still my, I think, based on like the rate and amount of time, my best performing book. And at the end of the day, that's really what I'm taking home with me. And I'm taking home with me really separation from the commercial success, and to me the fact that Delicious Monsters remains, and I'm still extremely proud of it, the best book I've written. And that is really what I carry with me into 2024. Now we're on to the section where I'm going to talk about things I learned this year. There will also be a section for things that I had to relearn, but starting with the things I learned, which was the first one, which was for me, I do not like presentations and workshops to the point where it is not worth it to push myself to do them. So I think really last year I was aware that I was not a big fan of doing workshops or presentations. I just find them to be very stressful. I find the idea of presenting as a solo person and like preparing a whole presentation or a workshop or what have you and presenting in that way, I find that to be a really stressful experience, which I know might seem funny because it's kind of like, am I not doing that in a bunch of my YouTube videos? Like I make a little script and I present and it feels like it's the same thing, but it's really not, because there is a sort of live audience component that feels very different. There also, for me, feels to be a certain pressure in that it has to be a certain level of quality, and like will or won't I reach that level of quality. And I think in 2022, even though I knew I didn't like them, I felt like this was something I had to push myself to do. And that like, okay, I know I don't like it, but this is kind of, you know, it's par for the course. And like, if I want to be invited to certain events, if I want to be able to do school visits and like interact with teens and like the actual people who I want to be reading my books and who I wrote the books for, I'm just going to have to push through it, and I'm just going to have to do it and like deal with it, put on my big girl panties, whatever you want to say. And so I had just resolved that that was the way things were going to go. And so I had like made this whole plan of like prepping and putting together a school visit thing. And then at some point in this year, I just realized, I was like, is this worth it for you? And I think the thing that I've done many times in the past, despite constantly being uncomfortable with the idea of doing that sort of style of public speaking, is I've always just made myself do it because I had to. So I didn't want to present, but I had to because I had to do it for school, or I didn't want to present, but I had to because I had to do it for work in order to be seen a certain way so that I could have access to things like promotions and raises, and I can make people like me more by doing the things that they wanted me to do, which was to do those sorts of presentations. And I've really kind of spent my whole life just forcing myself to do that stuff because that's just how life is and I just have to do it. And I just had this moment where I was like, but I don't. I'm a self-employed person now. I'm a self-employed person. I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. And nothing is going to, there's not going to be a consequence to that in the way that I'm thinking. So there are some events where the way the event is set up is it's all presentations and it's all workshops, and it's just, that's just the way they set up their event. So if you're not going to do that, you're not going to be able to do the event. And I think I was thinking of all those touch points as like places where I would like lose readers and lose opportunities. And so I had to do them. And more and more this year, I've just been like, is it worth it? Because I will spend weeks, sometimes months, in a state of anxiety over the fact that I'm doing this and that I have to do this. I spend the entire time dreading it. I do it in the moment, I just zone out and I do it. And afterwards, I appreciate, what I really like is getting to have the interaction portion with other people. And so to me, that has been kind of like my little reward for suffering suffering in that way is that then I get to enjoy the event and I get to have the sort of interactions with people that I want. And I just no longer feel the need to make myself suffer for that reason. I am not going to suddenly lose a bunch of readers for that, and maybe I might lose the opportunity to go to an event if that's just the way they're set up, but it's fine. I can do other things. I can move on to it. I think I was really just attached to the idea of feeling like I wasn't going to get to do anything if I didn't just force myself to do these specific things. Whereas I feel like I'd rather just kind of find more ways to do those things in a manner that works for me, which is like Q&As. I'm very, very comfortable with Q&As. I'm very, very comfortable with panels. I just don't want to do these presentation style things. And so I really put like a hard stop on myself. I am not going to just make myself do this because this is the way the world works, ? And you just have to do that sort of public speaking. That's not what I want to do. And so that is definitely a good learning for me this year. I also learned something pretty big about royalties. And so this is how I came to understand everything, how everything has come together with explanation. So if you have heard differently, that is fine. Feel free to work with what you have learned. This is just what I learned and how I learned it. So you have a royalty statement, and your royalty statement shows the books you have sold. And then you have some authors through different publishers have that portal, that sales portal that I talked about, where I was able to see, for example, my first week sales. And in the past, I've noticed a difference between what sales show on my royalty statement and what sales show in the portal. And in my head, I assumed that that meant the portal was somewhat inaccurate and my royalty statement was like my real sales. That is not true. So what the royalty statement is showing, at least in the case of my publisher, maybe different publishers do it different, but what the royalty statement is showing is how many copies of the book have been sold to bookstores or retailers or what have you. And so that is why the number is higher, because it is showing the total of how many books have been shipped out to booksellers. And that is what that is showing. So they're like, I would say, the commercial sales in that way, sort of generally. And then what is in the sales portal are the consumer sales. So those are how many actual books have been sold. So the royalty statement is the sales in bulk from publisher to bookstores and or retailers, and the portal is how many books from bookstores have been sold to consumers. Like they go into the store, they buy it, they take the copy home with them. And that is why the number is significantly smaller, because bookstores obviously will buy a lot of copies with the hopes that they will sell all of those, and then whatever they sell is whatever they sell. And that's why you have returns. So bookstores will return copies that they have not sold to publishers. They won't do this all at once. They do this at different times. Sometimes they want to try and see if maybe it'll sell more at different times. But let's say they buy 10 copies. So 10 is what shows up on your royalty statement. And then what they actually sell to the consumer is like maybe one book. So that's what would show up in your portal. And so the publisher, what they do is they reserve a certain number against returns. So they hold back some payment to you because they are guessing at how many books might be returned. And this is to mitigate them from overpaying you. It's also to mitigate you from, like, I guess, owing anything. And so that's how that whole thing is. But there is the possibility that if the book doesn't sell well, you might have a lot of copies returned. And so that's how that whole process worked. And so I learned that because I had gotten my first royalty statement, and I was shocked by how different the number was between what had been sold to stores and what had been sold on consumer end. And so that is just what I wanted to share, what I learned, because that was really big for me, because I was really, really confused because my royalty statement looked super positive and my portal looked like not so much. And I was like, well, which one of these is right? Like what's going on? And so the fact is, like, both are technically right. But for example, if your royalty statement sales, what they sold to bookstores, is really, really high, and what you sell to consumers is quite low, then you expect more returns. And so those numbers may come to even out over time, that sort of thing. So that was a big learning. I know, extremely technical, but this is something I'm how many years into this process, and how many royalty statements have I gotten so far? Like 4 or something like that, and I've never known that this was a thing. So I just thought I would share that. Another learning was that I could better manage my money. I think once I started writing full time, and I had kind of done that for the year, in my brain it felt very much like a fluke. Like I had somehow tricked my way into being here and doing this full time, and this was like kind of like a temporary thing, and eventually life would like slap me in the face and I'd go back to normal or something. So I just kind of, I tried to learn as much as I could about financial things, and I was kind of just working on my own. And then I got to the point this year where my partner was kind of like, we have a friend that does financial management, and he was talking to him about his own finances, and the friend was kind of like, you should probably manage your own. And I was like, because I was very tentative, but I ended up deciding to accept that help, because I'm at this point, it's kind of not a fluke anymore. Like I seem to be successfully writing full time and continuing. And if I'm going to continue doing that, I probably should learn to manage my money in a more coherent way. And I'm not a professional about that. I don't know those things. So why would I not seek the advice of a professional? And I do have an accountant, so I have an accountant helping me on that end, but financial planner is like something different. I don't even know that I can get into explaining. But you know, having someone help me in the management of my money, and so I learned to kind of prioritize that a bit more this year, and to stop seeing my earnings as a fluke and like a one-off thing or something that won't continue, and to kind of really try and set myself up for the best sort of success, especially because I'm self-employed and I'm managing this all on my own now. It's not as though I have an employer kind of picking and choosing and doing these things for me. Like I am the master of that now, and so I really should take a bit more responsibility in figuring out how to do things the right way. So I now have a financial planner, and that's something I decided to do. And finally, I learned that I need to chill. Specifically, I need to chill on trying to predict things and like jumping through hoops and doing all this different stuff based on all these random predictions in my head, and like to just calm down with that and to really become a little bit more taking things as they come up. For example, and this is something I'm going to talk about in January when I talk about my projects and all of that stuff. But I had this thing where I was like, okay, when my adult thriller goes on submission, what I should do is I should immediately start plotting and getting another book ready, just in case maybe it's a 2-book deal, or just in case maybe it flops, or you know, it bombs on submission and I need a new book, and then I'll already have something ready in advance, and blah 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 blah. And then I was just like, is that a priority right now? Is that necessary right now? Or are you panicking and like just doing extra things ahead of time that you don't necessarily need to do? And I realized I was just panicking and doing extra things that I in fact don't need to do right now in this point in my life. And so I think because when I started off in my career, like I think in between really like 2020, when I was no longer employed, and then I was like, I guess I'm just working on my books, and I felt like I was really filling time and space, and I had a lot of time and space to fill. And so it wasn't so much to be doing all of these extra things. And then when I got into 2022, that started to become quite a bit heavier to do, but I kept doing it anyway. And then I was really tired at the end of 2022. And at 2023, I feel like I kept doing these things, but I felt like I was doing it a little bit less. And I think this is really the year of learning to just stop. I think I'm at this point in my career where I really need to take things as they go, and to really stop trying to predict what's going to happen and try and have all these contingencies in place in case X happens or X happens or X happens. I really kind of don't have the time anymore. And so it's better for me to focus my time on things that are salient, on things that are coming up, on things that are contracted, and really kind of focus in that way. And so yeah, just kind of calming myself down in terms of trying to plan for every contingency. Also because I can't. I really can't successfully do that. I don't know that I can prep for all of those things. I cannot tell the future, and I know it's really just anxiety trying to mitigate and make me feel better, but what those things actually do is just kind of make me more stressed and put more things on my plate. So that's definitely something I've learned to really calm down in trying to plan for everything and creating more work for myself in trying to do that instead of waiting to see what an outcome is. And at that point, I can decide how I want to move forward. And now for the things that I had to relearn, because learning is not this perfect linear graph where you learn something and you're like, amazing, now just let me go through learning this thing and I'll always know it and I'll never forget and I'll definitely always abide by that. That is certainly not the case for me. And so these are some things that I thought I really had learned previously, and then I guess forgot and had to learn again. And so the first and biggest one of these is I define success for myself. Success is defined, the success of my books is defined by my own parameters, not by anyone else's. And I think that's huge. And I think that's necessary as an author, because if you decide that feeling that your book is a success is determined by other people only, or that your idea of success, your feeling of the book's success is secondary to those of other people, you will always kind of fail, is my opinion, or you will frequently fail, because it is very difficult to get to any sort of point where you feel like, yeah, everybody loves it and so everybody thinks it's a success and so I can also think that, because there's always going to be naysayers, there's always going to be people that do not like the book, there's always going to be things that you wanted the book to do that it hasn't done. You are never going to achieve everything and you are never going to get perfect reviews. And I think it's really easy to forget that all the time as an author, because I don't know, I feel I'm just speaking for myself. Maybe this applies to you also, but I feel like those accolades are very wanted, and very desired. And it feels like if I want to know if my book is doing good, I can look at X and X and X and X and X. And I think that was kind of how I felt going into it, and I was really looking for those markers, and I felt like if I see enough of those, then I'll know, okay, Delicious Monsters was a success. And I felt like I was seeing those, but then we came to this situation in which it was not commercially successful in that way. And then that set the tone, as I said, for my whole year, and it didn't have to because if I had from the beginning decided that how I felt about the book decided whether or not the book was successful, it would have been successful before it was even published. It would have been successful before it was even published, because I'm so proud of Delicious Monsters and I think it is such a good book. Again, I don't know how many times I can say this, my best work, honestly, my best work. And if I had done that from the beginning, monetarily, sure, it would have mattered, because I would have been like, how does this affect my deal? But I don't think I would have spent so much of the year in that kind of like downtrodden feeling if I had remembered that lesson. And so that's something that I'm gonna hold on really hard to when I go forward with other books. And I feel like for me, when I started like gaining accolades, I like pulled farther away from that. It felt like, oh, well, that was just something I said to myself in case things went bad so that I could feel better. But no, that should always be the standard for it. That should always be the standard for it, is that my book is a success before it even came out because I love it and I'm super proud of it, and that's what matters to me. And it's great, of course it's great if readers love it. I want readers to love it, but at the end of the day, that's the most important marker, and I think that's something I will be telling myself over and over again as I go through this journey of being an author. Now I'm going to talk about my reading stats and a little like small reflection on my reading at the end. If you're really just here for writing and author content and you don't really care about reading stuff, that's totally fine. Again, there are timestamps so you can skip forward to my final reflection wrap up for the year. But if you are interested in reading and the sort of stats and like what I've been doing reading wise, then continue on with me here. So these stats are up to and inclusive of November 30th, just because I like try and film things a little bit in advance, and in order to post this into December, I wasn't going to have full December statistics anyway, so I decided to just kind of do this up to and including November 30th. And so on that note, overall, I read 122 books this year. This is actually really similar to what I read last year, which I think was like 110, something like that, like very close to that amount. So I'm very, very much in that sort of wheelhouse, though I will say I did read, I think, quite a bit more manga and graphic novels this year, whereas last year I felt like I read quite a bit more novels. But yeah, let's get into the little stats things. I'm gonna have a little stat chart. So let's get into that. Books read by month. So I was actually surprised by how even this pie chart is. Like, I really in general read about the same amount of books per month, which is I think around that like 7 to 10 range is how much I read per month. And September is the biggest chunk of this chart, and that's because in September I read all 13 volumes of Blood on the Tracks, the manga. And so because I read 13 volumes, or not even all 13, I think I read from like 7 to 13 or like 5 to 13. I read a lot of Blood on the Tracks, and so that I think really inflated the September numbers to make them look much larger. But it's because I was borrowing the series from the library, and so I was like, all my holds were coming in at once, and so I was like just plowing straight through on Blood on the Tracks. But yeah, I read a similar number per month. I feel like do a lot of swapping. I'm very, very mood reader heavy. And so sometimes in the month I'm like, I really want to read these things, and I frequently will not do it. It's very difficult for me to make myself read anything in any given month. So I do a lot of book swapping, I do a lot of DNFing, I jump all over the place, but it's fun to know that I generally read kind of a consistent amount. And here is my book enjoyment chart. So this is a new system that I started doing this year. So I forgot to say this in the beginning, but I track my books in Notion on my own, just kind of privately, because as an author, there's a lot of things. And so I don't use Goodreads to publicly post a lot reviews or anything like that. Sometimes I rate books, but I really am only rating books that I'm rating books 5 stars. And so I really track all of my reading in Notion privately. And I was not rating books at all, really. I was just marking if a book was a fave of the year last year. And then I got to the end of the year and I was like, did I like anything? Like, it felt like I had a very small amount of like favorite books of the year in comparison to like the amount of books that I read. And I was like, so did I really only like these like 10 or 11 books, and like the other 90 whatever books I read, like I didn't like those? And so I created this new rating system for myself, which is I have a fave of the year, I have nearly a fave, I have liked it a lot, I have enjoyed minus the ending, so I generally enjoyed it, I just didn't like the ending. And then afterwards I have other things like meh and not a fan, and then like I think I have just like disliked, and then I have hated, like I hated it, and then I have a did not rate, and I think I do the did not rate is what I do for like when I beta read stuff. Like if I beta read something, I'm not going to rate it because it's not in its finished form or anything like that. I really love using this system because I feel like it just gives me a much more accurate sense about how I felt overall about what I was reading. And when I was just paying attention to like my favorite books of the year, like your favorite books of the year, you're not going to have a ton of those generally. And so I really like doing this because now I can see very clearly, very visually that basically like 75% of what I read, I enjoyed. I either enjoyed it or I liked it a lot. Even like enjoyed minus ending isn't even that big of a slice. Usually I enjoyed things or I liked them a lot, or they were nearly a fave, or they were a fave of the year, which is amazing that 75% of my reading, that was it. And even of like the negative chunks, like sometimes there were books that I just felt meh about, sometimes I just wasn't a fan, but it was pretty rare for me to hate a book, and so I feel like I have so much more of an accurate idea of my feelings about what I was reading, because that's what I care about. I care about how I felt about it, and I think that's why I don't like star ratings, because star ratings seem to, I don't know, I guess for me they feel like I'm making some sort of like objective judgment, even though I know they're obviously subjective and different people have very different feelings about their star ratings, but it feels like it applies a certain like standardization that I don't for myself enjoy. I would rather just be able to know this is the way I felt when I finished the book. And the fact that I felt positively when I finished 75% of the books that I read, like, to me, that's amazing. And really, I'd say that meh part is kind of feeling neutral. But yeah, so very, very excited, and I'm definitely going to be continuing on with this system. This also like made it for me like much more easy for me to like rate books, because I could really just tell right away, like, either I enjoyed it or I really liked it. And even things that I like liked a lot, it's not to say that I didn't have anything where I was like, but it was just, that was my general feeling. And it's nice because then when I look back on those books in that section, I'm like, I did like it a lot. And so very nice. I was very happy with doing that. And books by genre. So unsurprisingly to me, I read overwhelmingly horror, which is kind of the trend for me these days. I also will say that when I like picked these genres, just because of how I had to put data together, I basically picked one genre for every book, even if books like clearly kind of fit into multiple genres, just to simplify this whole process for myself. And so some of these are like, you know, I guess like fantasy horror, sci-fi horror, what have you, but it's just like the general feeling I got from it was horror. So nearly 50% of my reading, like what does it say, 41.5% of my reading was horror, and then a big chunk was fantasy, which makes sense for me. I do also read a lot of fantasy. And then another big chunk was contemporary, which for me in the past has been quite rare. I don't usually read contemporary books. However, I know that most of the chunk of that contemporary is actually graphic novels. So I found that for whatever reason, even though I don't often read contemporary novels, I do really like reading a lot of contemporary graphic novels. And I think I read a lot of contemporary like middle grade graphic novels in particular. And so I think that's why that chunk suddenly expanded, because I was suddenly reading so much more of those. And then that larger memoir section as well is the case because I started reading a lot of graphic memoirs. I really love to read a graphic novel memoir, and so I think that's also why that section has suddenly expanded and is like a big chunk over there because of reading that. So it's really been fun for me to realize that like my graphic novel taste and my novel taste is actually like can be so different, and I'm actually more likely, I think, to pick up a contemporary or a memoir in a graphic novel than I am to pick up like a horror or a sci-fi or fantasy, whereas when I'm reading novels, those are 100% my go-tos, and I'm actually less likely to pick those up in novel form. So thought that was fun. And now for books by type, so the type of book that I was reading, whether that be manga, graphic novels, or novels. And this was, I think, the stat that I was most curious about, because I knew that I had significantly increased the amount of graphic novels that I was reading throughout the year, and so I kind of half expected this to maybe be 50-50, but it's exciting to see that I still read mostly novels. So 63% of my reading was still novels, and then a very large chunk of graphic novels and a little chunk of manga. That whole chunk of manga is like mostly Blood on the Tracks though, because I read 13 volumes in 1 year. Otherwise, I don't think I actually read a ton of manga otherwise. So yeah, it's mostly Blood on the Tracks. But I read a lot of different graphic novels, which I was really excited about, and I want to read even more graphic novels going forward. I'll talk about that more when I talk about my final reflection. But yeah, I was really excited to see how this book type fell out, because I think I wouldn't want to be reading, I think, more graphic novels than novels, because I think because I write novels, I really want to at least be reading 50% novels. But I think this is a really fun split, and I've really enjoyed my reading this year, and I think the addition of graphic novels has really helped with that. And now for book format. So I will pause because this is one that's more spread out, so I do actually have to look at what I had for this. So yeah, the physical section is about 40%, ebook 23%, and audio 34%, and then 1.6% for mixed. So this is where I started the book physically and then I switched to audio, almost always that exact formatting. And so I mark those as mixed. Initially, I was surprised to see so much physical book reading until I remembered the graphic novels. So in the beginning of the year, I was reading a lot of graphic novels online as ebooks from the library, and then because I was liking them so much, I started physically purchasing a lot of them, and so then I was reading most graphic novels physically, and so that made a big difference in my physical book reading numbers. Whereas I feel like when it comes to novels, most of the time I am reading them by audio, because it's just easier for me. It works out better. I do still read novels physically, but I feel like definitely the bulk of my novel reading is coming through audio, just because it ends up working a little bit better for me. Sometimes I feel a little bit slumpy, and I feel like when I feel slumpy, I'm more likely to read via audio, whereas a graphic novel, I'm only ever going to read in like an ebook or physical format, and so I think that's what made those numbers a little bit bigger. And finally, book origin. So when I talk about, so I have some sections here. So I have the beta reads, arcs, whether those are physical arcs or what have you. It's just I got them as an arc. Subscription, which is really just Scribd, which I use for audiobooks, sometimes ebooks, but mostly audiobooks. And then the library, which is essentially Libby. I rarely physically borrow books from the library. I did this year, but I don't often do that. I usually just get it through Libby. And then owned. So owned meaning not only just what I physically own, but if I use a credit. So if I use a credit on Audible or I use a credit on Libro FM, I'm counting that as owned because I own the book at that point. So most of this is owned. So 54% owned, 28% from the library, 12% from subscriptions, 4% from ARCs, and 0.8% beta reads, because I only beta read one book this year, to my knowledge. Yes, I only did one book beta read this year. So yeah, mostly owned. I feel like this is largely from impatience, but I did have a goal of like using the library more this year, and I do feel like I did utilize the library a lot more, which is helpful. I think the owned books started to increase once I realized again that I liked the graphic novels so much, and I stopped borrowing them from the library and I started purchasing a bunch. So that made things different, but I'm happy with at least using the library that much, and I would like to use it more in that case. I think, yeah, I think I really would like to cut down my physical novel purchasing a little bit more, which is kind of a bit of a balance because I always want to support authors, and so I keep wanting to buy books because I want to support authors and things like that. But you know, I can support through the library too, so I want to try and do that a little bit more, and then I won't have to do so much. Like, I find myself having to do a lot of like book donating or moving around, and I don't have a ton of space for a ton of books to begin with. So you know, we'll be managing that a little bit more. So definitely would like to do more library things next year. And for the reading reflection, if you couldn't already tell, adding more graphic novels really brought a lot of joy to my reading, and I've really been enjoying it. I am only becoming more and more obsessed with graphic novels and collecting and reading more, and one day I very much hope to be able to do a graphic novel, not illustrate it because I'm not good at that, but to write and collaborate with someone who can illustrate. And so I feel like as I'm reading more, I'm like becoming more I'm becoming more familiar with the medium and different authors and like different styles and that sort of thing. I found like, you know, people that I really like I really like Brenna Thumler's work, and anything that Mariko Tamaki writes, I feel like I fall in love with. And so I feel like I'm starting to recognize different people and artists, and that's been really wonderful for me. The only thing I'd kind of like to improve, I guess, a little bit with my writing is as an author, I am sometimes asked to blurb books. So they'll give me the book in advance and ask me to read it and like, you know, write a little blurb, which then might be used on the cover or in the marketing, etc. And this has been a bit of a challenge for me this year. As I said before, because I'm such a mood reader, it is very, very hard for me to read to a deadline. Even if I have like a very far away deadline, like it can sometimes be really difficult for me to be like, okay, now I have to read this book at this time to do this thing. Yeah, it can sometimes be a struggle, and it's not like the book being bad or anything. It's just like I can't, it's hard for me to just make myself read something when I might not be in the mood for it. So I did feel a little bit bad because some books I just wasn't able, time ran out, I wasn't able to do it. I started getting stressed about trying to read it in time. So I'm hopeful that like next year maybe I can get a little bit better with this. But again, I don't really know that I can change being a mood reader necessarily. So maybe not, but yeah, hopefully one day I could get a little bit better at that. But otherwise, very happy with my reading. I feel like I had a really chill reading time. I feel like in the beginning of the year, I was very gung-ho, like I want to hit 100 books. And then at some point in the year, I just like stopped paying attention to that and I chilled out and I hit 100 books anyway. But I think, yeah, definitely in the future, I want to calm down and not at any point be concerned about the number of books that I'm reading and just kind of enjoy what I'm reading. And once again, I would like to read more backlist. I do find myself still gripping for new releases. I feel like that's part of the mood reading. I'm like, I want to read the shiny new, but I would love to read more from backlist things and like explore more of authors I've been enjoying. And I do think I have been doing more of that. It's just, it's been like, I enjoyed this author's past work, and so I'm gonna read their new book. And I'd like to get a little bit more into backlists and things like that. But otherwise, yeah, very happy with my reading this year. And the final reflection on 2023. Wow, I feel like any year this had its ups and downs. I feel like at the tail end of last year, I felt like the kid that everyone wanted to pick for their team. Suddenly I was like, oh, it invites to this. And then at the beginning of the year, I felt like the kid that like fell in a puddle or like did something really embarrassing on the first day. And I kept thinking about it even when no one else cared anymore. And I kept being like, everyone remembers when I fell in the puddle, but nobody cared. And I truly should have moved on from it so long ago. I feel like that was kind of my theme for this year. And going into next year, I don't want to be doing that stuff anymore. I don't want to be thinking about a puddle that nobody cares about. But I think the things that I relearned in this year are really going to help me going forward with that. And I feel really hopeful about things next year. Like I already have things that I'm excited about. Like I'm excited about doing my little pre-order campaign for Tender Beasts. Like even though I know it's probably going to be a lot of work, and it already has been a lot of work, it's been work that's been like fun, and I'm really excited about getting to, you know, send little goodies to people who have read and enjoyed. Well, they might not have read Delicious Monsters, but are at least excited about Tender Beasts, or people that are fans of Delicious Monsters that are also pre-ordering or library requesting Tender Beasts that are excited to get some Delicious Monsters stuff. I'm really excited about that. I'm excited about my new book series that I have. That's really exciting, very challenging also, but really exciting. And I feel like I'm going forward with the right expectations now. I think at the end of last year, I had kind of had this feeling of, well, I'm just on to the next one, on to the next one. Like I felt like I had attached something to Blood Like Fate and like hadn't done what I thought it should do. And then I was like, well, on to the next one, because Delicious Monsters is going to do all of this stuff. And then I got to the beginning of the year and I found out that Blood Like Fate had done perfectly well and everything was fine. And then the book that I had kind of shoved all of my new hopes onto hadn't done, I guess. You know, it hadn't quite met those expectations. And then I was kind of floundering and doing all of this stuff. And I really didn't go into the year with the right expectations. Like I went into it expecting external validation to decide the success of my book. And I think this year I'm going into it very much with, I'm excited for Tender Beasts. I'm excited to celebrate and enjoy everything Tender Beasts as it comes out and afterwards. And like I've got all this stuff planned to do that's like little like promo videos and stuff, but I'm not going into it with the expectation of the promo videos doing things. I just kind of like, this is fun stuff that lets me celebrate my book and share my book with other people, and that is what should have always mattered. And now I've relearned myself in that, and I feel like I'm going forward with those expectations and the expectations of like just being very excited about A Mastery of Monsters and really working on getting a final product that I'm really proud of and that I really want to put out, and like I said before, have decided is a success right from that moment just because I'm proud of it and I'm really excited to share it with people. And so I feel like I've got things aligned properly, and hopefully I can carry that through to the whole of next year, and I won't be in my 2024 wrap up telling everybody that I had to relearn this again, which that's the process. Sometimes you have to relearn things a few times, but I really want to just go forward and just have a great year because I'm really proud of my book and I'm really proud of Tender Beasts. I'm really excited for everyone to read it. It's like, it's not a slasher, but it's got a slasher vibe to it. It's got that sort of like slasher-esque vibe. I love the rich family drama and the legacies and all of the things that come with it. And I'm so excited for all those little promo videos and like fun little content things that I have planned to go forward. And so I feel like I'm feeling very hopeful and very excited about 2024, and also very calm in my body, because this isn't a year where I'm like, I have to sell something or I might not live. I'm not going into this year because I don't have to do that, and so it's nice to go into it with like a chill vibe and a chill feeling. So that's how I'm ending 2023, going into 2024. And I will ask you for the end of this video what's something that you did in 2023 that you're really proud of yourself for doing. It doesn't have to be writing related, just something you did that you're proud of and you're happy about. I would love to hear that. Just kind of, you know, round out the year, end with some positivity. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!